Welcome back to Ignorance is Infinite, where father and daughter discuss generational topics leading to the accumulation of Black and minority wealth. I'm getting there late, she's getting there early.
Yep. And before we hop into today's podcast episode, a quick word from our sponsor. This segment is brought to you by Ariel Rosado. Visit his channel on YouTube, Ariel Rosado, for all things on luxury fashion, styling tips, and New York City lifestyle blogs.
Today's topic, cancel culture and the effects.
But I think before we talk about the effects, we should talk about where this even came from. When did we start canceling people? So I started looking into it, and apparently it started during the George Zimmerman trial. So for those of you who don't know, George Zimmerman had shot an unarmed Black teenager named Trayvon Martin in his neighborhood. And on trial, it was a really viewed case. And they ended up acquitting George Zimmerman. And only one of the jurors spoke out on the verdict. And she happened to be the wife of a lawyer. So she started talking about the science of picking jurors and kind of what you would need to do to pick jurors that would give you the verdict that you want. It's like there's a science behind it. And she ended up being offered a book deal. So then Twitter, specifically Black Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
a big outrage that came back after this, and people were saying, like, how could you give her a book deal? Because they were just mad that she was part of the group that acquitted George Zimmerman. And they started using the hashtag JurorB37, which was what she was, and saying that her book deal should be canceled, and ultimately it was. So then that's where it kind of all started.
That is interesting backstory. I hadn't heard about that story. I mean, because the goal and the science of picking jurors has been going on forever. I mean, it's a show on CBS now called Bull, where they're paid to watch the jurors and their movements. And both sides get to pick a juror. They argue over a juror, but you only get so many that you can excuse. So it's just a weird process in that whole democracy in terms of, your own trial being tried by and judged by your peers, how you get there. So the whole cancel culture of that nature is kind of weird. And what's kind of bringing it up is that lately, a lot of people have been using that term for a lot of different reasons. I mean, you got the Dr. Seuss books that are getting canceled, Pepe Le Pew. That's just the minor stuff. You had the whole Hollywood season where the Me Too movement, rose, and it's different things going on, but a lot of people are lumping that together with being woke and cancel culture. And even right now on Fox News, it's like that's their word. Trump's out. We're going after the woke and the cancel culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Bill Maher referred to the mobs behind cancel culture as woke brats, which is an interesting way to look at it. He went on a rant the other day on his show, and he was saying that the goalposts for avoiding cancel culture keeps moving. At first it started off, who are you in this present moment? You get canceled for what you do now, but now somebody could dig through your Facebook and your Twitter and say you're canceled because of something you tweeted 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's like social media has helped really illuminate it. That's where you can cancel somebody because then you get somebody's opinion. I think we had a discussion previously where I was like, well, if 3 or 4 people express an opinion and somebody in the media gloms onto that and then runs with it, it becomes, well, it offended people. 2 people, 3 people, maybe a dozen, maybe 10,000 people. But in a nation of 330 million, should 10,000 people drive 330 million's opinion? Recently, we had, there's a show I watched, The Mandalorian. One of the actresses on there was a former MMA fighter, Gina Carano. She did this tweet. She's on the conservative side, so she's put a lot of opinions out there. She tweeted some stuff, and one of the things she tweeted was, something about the Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. And she tried to equate that with speaking conservative beliefs, you know, behind Trump and that type of ideology. And the reaction was swift. I mean, she was about to get her own show and she was just pretty much canceled.
Well, that also makes me think of on a smaller scale, because when you think about more larger events like this, millions of people are maybe watching this on TV or they're looking at this on social media. But I know that the Teen Vogue, they recently hired a new editor, and she got fired before she could even start, just because her coworkers found out that she tweeted a few racist things like 10 years ago when she was 17, and the brand fired her before she could start. So it wasn't even like a grand scale; it was just her coworkers canceled her.
That is, yes, it's crazy. I mean, you brought up a little bit earlier, you know, pre-production when we were talking about the Central Park Karen, her losing her job. We had previously did an episode where we were discussing the whole thing about the don't want to have a brain freeze.
Brain freeze.
Brain freeze. This segment's Bachelor. Oh, okay. And the actual winner, once they found out, the guy who chose her found out about what was going on in the background, was like, yo, yeah, we can't get together. So first the host got it, right? He stepped away from his duties as he said some things defending her for something that was said or in her college years. Now, she didn't look too far removed, 4 or 5 years. And that kind of relates to, you know, your Bill Maher comment about 10 years, 20 years ago, how these things haunt you. But the effects are so real. Kevin Hart, he was supposed to host the Golden Globes a few years ago. Something came out about, he said something about gays or something in comedy 10 years ago. Shut him down.
I almost forgot about that, which is another thing that you could bring up. You can be canceled and still not have to go away. Because Kevin Hart is basically back in business. You can survive being canceled. It's more of a slap on the wrist.
It all depends. It depends on how big your wrist is. I mean, he's a huge star, and he's generating a lot for the people that put him in movies, his comedy tours that he's been filming. Some people say no one's going to do it the same way he's done it. Mm-hmm. So he's generating revenues. Revenue, money, always got to follow the money. It's just the biggest thing. So other people get canceled because they don't generate money. You can be forgiven for anything. You say sorry, get 2 or 3 chances. You know, as long as it's nothing as egregious, it's like murder, and somebody can't come back from that. You can get 2nd, 3rd, 4th chances if you're generating funds.
Money is probably one of the biggest motivating factors for when somebody actually gets canceled. Because you could say an employer firing somebody or a show getting canceled, a book deal getting lost. That's also I'm saying, okay, there's a clear indicator here that nobody's going to want to look at this. Nobody's going to want to buy this because there's outrage over you and they're boycotting you. And that's why we're going to cancel you. Not because we don't like what you said, because we've all said some dumb stuff, but now you're getting in the way of our money.
So the question for us in the Black community, minority community, is would you watch old episodes of The Cosby Show? Would you have a real problem?
That's not a measly cancel. I mean, Bill's in jail.
Right, but in terms of the show, there's a bunch of other actors that were on the show. They started losing income in syndication. Now, again, the show has been off the air for a long time. Mm-hmm. The syndication are like 3rd, 4th, 5th level. So that type of money is not generating the money that Friends or Seinfeld are still doing. But at the same time, it did affect people. And it's just weird how that decision affects people. And it was like, you know, the moment Bill Cosby said he wanted to buy NBC, all of a sudden, stuff that's been going on for decades and decades came to light. A lot of people came out of the woodworks, sort of like what's going on. Well, feels like. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know the people's stories. So again, these are our opinions. You know, we're not lawyers or anything like that. But what's going on with Cuomo, right? It seems like all of a sudden it's very concentrated. Person after person, day after day. All of a sudden now feel free. They want to tell these stories in these lawsuits. Even the quarterback in Houston. I don't know if you heard about that story.
Mm-mm.
He's a Houston quarterback. He just got a extension for $160 million, 4 years. It was going to start with this upcoming season. And he's like, I want to be out of Houston. A lot of things going on in the background. I don't like it anymore. I'm not saying what's going on is happening just because of that, but all of a sudden there are 12 lawsuits, civil, that means they're going after money, alleging misconduct of some type at massage parlors. And I don't even know if it's tied to this whole Asian thing, Asian hate that's going on, because there's a lot of extenuating circumstances going on that, you know, you could pull different threads and have different type of stories about it. But it's just weird that like all of a sudden it's so concentrated that people become, they stepped up to like all this courage.
Mhm. Which, while you were talking, that made me think that we should let our viewers know that you're more anti-cancel culture than I am. I seem to be for canceling people, and you're
I'm just not in a public forums in such that, you know, it's so grand. People who become famous all of a sudden have problems with it sometimes because that exposure, that requirement. People get fired all the time. They did something wrong. They said something wrong. They get fired at work. They move on. They try to get another job because cancel could mean you lose your income. So follow the money on one side, do you generate money? But at the same time, how do you feed your family? If you have a family, how do you feed yourself? How do you take care of yourself? So I worry about that part of the outcome because that could lead to the dark. Oh, I can't get a job everywhere I go. Oh, you that guy, you that girl. Now we don't want you here, and you spiral. You start taking drugs, you start doing bad things. That has an effect on you as a person, probably your family, cousins, sisters, brothers, mother, father. Like it could just go somewhere real ugly for some people that have that crowd mentality. Yeah, yeah, you, yeah. And then you go about your business, but they have to live with those consequences. So that's not anti-cancel culture, but at the same time, there has to be some empathy.
I suppose. I guess I wasn't really thinking about after you get the result you want from canceling someone.
What happens?
You're in the mob mentality in Central Park Karen and you're seeing red.
Mhm.
You're like, yay, she got fired. But then you start, I remember I told you that and you were like, well, now what? What happens after she got canceled? Is she supposed to never work again?
Right, because the cancel culture that we see in the media, social media, feels like, oh, we've all been given an opportunity to be judges without repercussions. Hey, you're out. You can work with this type of person. You still employ this type of person. Now they fire. Okay, who's next? Who do we got the next? So what happened to that person? All right, so she said on her phone, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this guy, yeah, I'm going to call the police. Okay, and in this racial climate, especially when Trump was president, yeah, it could cause reactions, people doing things out of turn. That could have caused that dude to act in a way that would have fell into that narrative, and then he gets arrested and ruin his life. But I'm the type that I hate saying those type of hypotheticals. It could have, it might have, it would, it didn't. When it happens, now let's judge what happened.
Well, I think it's interesting that cancel culture started from like a racial conflict. Like people were mad at a juror acquitting George Zimmerman. But now it's more about being politically correct and it's starting to get more minute and more minor. You could say
And that's what happens when you let Pandora out the box, right? It was used for something specific. They use that in political terms too. You take a power away from one president or expand his power. Now Trump comes in and he has that power. Let's circle it back to Dr. Seuss. You have a young child. Have you ever read her Dr. Seuss book prior? Or is Dr. Seuss out now?
I was mom this the other day. Before this whole controversy with him being anti-Semitic and then racist came out, I loved reading her the Dr. Seuss books. Like there were a ton. Christian was like, "Oh, I love Green Eggs and Ham." Like I think those books are they're so fun. They're cute to read, and she seems to like them. But then the other day I was walking, and for the longest I wanted to get Walk It in My Pocket. It's one of his books. And I saw it the other day in Target, and I told mom that I was like, they're all on sale now, by the way. His whole series was in a little sale section. And I had to put it down. I was like, oh no, I can't get this now.
You should get it as a collector's item. You know, it's going to go up in value.
It just felt like I don't want to then teach her these things that people are saying are hidden within the lines of the book. I mean, I read it, but somebody else did. Now I can't read.
That's true, but it's almost weird because, right, if all of us read it, all nationalities have been reading it our whole lives, did it affect some people differently? You know, like kids grow up based on their surroundings, but they start out, it's an empty slate. They love each other until they're taught not to. But if we all read the same book coming up, did our nurturing or environment influence us differently?
But it could also be said that as the generations progress, we're getting more and more politically correct. Because a lot of people will.
That's a dangerous word too, that you do it just for other people. I'm not even gonna get into the word I was using the other day with your mother. I don't want the blowback just yet.
Oh.
But you know, it just really comes down to trying to figure out
To those things.
how it's going to affect us. The reason I think this cancel culture is important to us is because we already live, and we had a conversation about that, right? When you ascend as a minority to a position of power, that you're worried about doing it perfect. Or if you lose that opportunity, not getting that opportunity again, and probably messing it up for other minorities. So it's like we need to be perfect. Can we afford to be canceled? For thoughts, something we said. That's very dangerous and scary ground.
We'll stop saying those things.
Well, then it goes back to Bill Maher, right? It depends on what they're saying, right? He said, yeah, grow up here, or whatever. Sometimes they're insensitive. Yes. But we learn how to deal with it. That's how we built up our tolerance. Red blood cells, white blood cells.
Cancel.
Not just cancel it and move on like it doesn't exist or it doesn't happen.
So you wouldn't cancel Dr. Seuss?
No, technically they haven't canceled Dr. Seuss. They've removed some books. They said they'll stop printing them, but the libraries that have them already, they're like, man, we're not going to throw them out. Once they wear out, they get too old, and it's that natural process, we won't reorder them. Mm-hmm. You know, so each person's going to make their decision, and that's what you have to do, you know.
Well, that's also an interesting standpoint of, we're not going to throw away the book. Even if it says something racist, we'll just wait until it's old and decrepit.
The question is that it got printed. Was it racist then? Was it racist in the 50s? When did it get printed? At what point? Somebody let it through. And now that it's been deemed in this climate as really insensitive, and you got this face like, I'm not defending it. I'm telling you, everything has to be put into context.
No, that's like saying Nazi training books were accepted in the time, so we should keep them in the library.
They still publish Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, because if you do not understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. So if you think you wipe it out, now it's no longer there, somebody else is going to come around and write something similar enough that you're like, oh, wow, this is great. And then later, in 20 years, Vera's going to be like, oh, this is racist. But cancel.
The thing is, Mein Kampf is looked at psychologically and viewed with the undertone that this was wrong. If a child picks up this Dr. Seuss book, they're just going to think it's normal to say something. Or I think one of the issues with one of the books is that they call Asians yellow, or they say like racist things towards Jews. And then if a child goes and says that, thinking, oh, I found it in the library, it's not the same thing as it being read in a controlled setting.
So you're going to become a book hunter and check every library. You still have these books?
Well, we talked about this in a previous episode that I wanted to make sure that a lot of Vera's books had Black people in it. And Dr. Seuss, I don't think has any.
You have green people.
It is about a white man.
That's true. I mean, more and more people are writing them. So, you know, the amount of choice and variety and diversity is growing. But the ones that we grew up with. They helped us learn to read. They told us little stories. And then in the context of our nurturing, we figure stuff out in our communities.
It starts getting into that territory of people saying, well, I grew up saying this term, and now people are saying I'm being insensitive. But I used to say this all the time.
And you were insensitive all the time, I guess. It all depends on where you're using it. There used to be a separation of private life and work life, and you said certain things amongst your friends that you didn't say at work. But because of social media, it's just all out there. and everybody doesn't have the proper filters to catch what they shouldn't be saying or should be saying. Nobody grows up in a totally sanitized, homogenous way. There's still arguments about integration and desegregation or re-desegregating so that people can grow up a certain way and understand their full culture and contributions. You know, that's a topic for another day. But this has been a great episode. This program today was sponsored by Secrets Between Friends. Buy it again for the first time. Go to www.secretsbetweenfriends.com and purchase something vintage. Thank you. Thank you. Great episode. We'll see you soon.